Behind the gleaming skyscrapers, the vibrant cultural scenes, and the charming picturesque landscapes of America's cities, a sinister reality lurks. The reasonless fury and hostility of racism and segregation, a toxic stain on the nation's fabric, persists in many urban and rural areas, making life unbearable for blacks in there. From overt acts of violence to subtle microaggressions, racism has been a suffocating presence in cities and towns that should have promised freedom, equality, and opportunity. The echoes of slavery, segregation, and systemic oppression still reverberate through the streets of these cities, where Black Americans are disproportionately affected by poverty, police brutality, lack of access to education, health care, and economic opportunities. The weight of history bears down on these communities, perpetuating cycles of injustice and inequality. Here, we expose these top racist cities in the U.S., where systemic racism, hate crimes, and racial disparities make them hazardous for Black Americans to live, work, and thrive. Before we go ahead with it, don't forget to hit the thumb button to show support, share the video with as many as you can to keep your friends and families informed, and if you still haven't, do kindly subscribe to our channel for more insightful contents and stay updated on our latest releases. Now, without further ado, here are the top 15 racist cities in the U.S. blacks must abstain from. Number 1, Negro Foot, Virginia. Just the mere mention of the name already gives one cold sweats under the hot sun. The name clearly screams it all, that not one single Negro is allowed to step foot in the community and its vicinity. Negro Foot is an unincorporated community in Hanover County, Virginia. The city is so synonymous with the Ku Klux Klan and racial violence that it's named after the organization's brutal traditions. It's said that the community gets its name from a local landmark, but the history of this place is said to have more than one origin story. But all of them are rooted in racial violence and a black man being brutalized as a warning. According to a local legend, white slave owners had cut off an enslaved man's foot as punishment for running away and seeking freedom. And another account, a local history tome, says the tradition of the place has it that for an atrocious act of cannibalism, a recently arrived African was drawn and quartered, and that, as a warning, parts of his body were hung in various parts of the colony. His foot, giving name to a section that is still known as Negro Foot. Another work notes that slaveholders sometimes purposefully crippled habitual runaway slaves by cutting off one foot or one or more toes. In 1705, when slavery was codified, dismemberment was considered a legitimate form of punishment for habitual runaways, as long as it was not likely to prove fatal. Gross, right? As the years passed by, the legacy of brutality and oppression continued to shape the social fabric of the community. In Negro Foot, segregation is not just a matter of law, but a way of life. Black men are relegated to the fringes of society, forced to live in cramped, ramshackle cabins on the outskirts of town. They are all denied access to basic amenities, such as health care, education, and employment opportunities. The community's white residents, on the other hand, enjoys a life of relative privilege and comfort. They live in grand antebellum mansions with sprawling lawns and ornate fountains, controlling the local economy, owning the land, the businesses, and the institutions that govern daily life. Number 2, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a city nestled on the shores of Lake Michigan, has a complex and troubled history when it comes to issues of racism and racial tension. The city's struggles with systemic racism, segregation, and racial disparities have had a profound impact on the lives of its residents, particularly those from African American and other marginalized communities. The roots of Milwaukee's racial tensions date back to the early 20th century, when the city experienced significant immigration and migration, leading to tensions between white and black residents. The city's manufacturing industry, which was a major driver of the local economy, was also segregated, with African Americans often relegated to lower paying and more menial jobs. As the civil rights movement gained momentum in the 1960s, Milwaukee became a focal point for protests and marches. The city's African American community, frustrated by decades of segregation and inequality, took to the streets to demand change. The 1967 Milwaukee riot, sparked by tensions between police and the African American community, highlighted one of the deep-seated racial tensions in the city. Today, Milwaukee remains one of the most segregated cities in the United States. The city's segregation index is a staggering 79.8, meaning that nearly 80% of either African Americans or whites would need to move to a different neighborhood to achieve integration. This segregation has contributed to significant racial disparities in areas such as education, employment, healthcare, and housing. For example, the median household income for African American families in Milwaukee is significantly lower than that of white families. The city's public schools are also highly segregated, with many African American students attending schools with limited resources and opportunities. Additionally, Milwaukee has some of the worst health outcomes for African Americans in the country, including high rates of infant mortality, hypertension, and diabetes. Number 3, Minneapolis. Behind the facade of Minneapolis's sparkling lakes, pristine green spaces, and bicycle-friendly streets, a more complex reality lurks. Residents of this proudly liberal city swell with pride over its many attractions, drawing comparisons to Copenhagen and boasting a legacy of progressive politics inspired by iconic figures like Hubert Humphrey, Walter Mondale, and Paul Wellstone. Yet, despite this self-image of inclusivity and social consciousness, deep-seated racial tensions and disparities have long plagued this Midwestern metropolis, revealing a troubling dichotomy between Minneapolis's polished exterior and its more troubled, unequal interior. The city's history of racism dates back to the early 20th century, when discriminatory practices in real estate and lending, including redlining and racial covenants, limited the choices of where Black residents could live. These practices effectively pushed Black residents into small, segregated areas, while other neighborhoods became predominantly white. This legacy of segregation has persisted, with Minneapolis experiencing some of the worst racial disparities in the nation today. One of the most striking examples of these disparities is in home ownership rates. In Minnesota, the median net worth of white households is $211,000, compared to just $0 for Black households and $18,000 for Latino households. This wealth gap is a direct result of generations of systemic racism, which has limited access to credit, education, and job opportunities for communities of color. The consequences of these disparities are far-reaching. For example, a recent study found that historically redlined neighborhoods in Minneapolis are hotter than other areas of the city, disproportionately exposing communities of color to heat-related illness. This is because these neighborhoods have fewer trees, parks, and green spaces, and more heat-trapping concrete buildings and asphalt roads. The extraordinary racial gap for Minnesotans when it comes to education outcomes and healthcare is just another absurd act in a state where progressive ideals often mask stark realities. Despite Minnesota's reputation for excellent schools and top-notch medical care, African American and indigenous students lag far behind their white peers in reading and in proficiency of so many other subjects. Black families own their homes at far lower rates than white families, among the largest such disparity in the country. And the city's predominantly white police force, which has been accused of racist practices for decades, rarely disciplines officers with troubled records. The Minnesota paradox, a term coined by Professor Samuel L. Myers, Jr., refers to the stark contrast between Minnesota's reputation as a progressive and inclusive state and the harsh reality of its racial disparities. This paradox is evident in the fact that Minnesota is one of the best places to live in America, with excellent schools, housing, and job opportunities, yet it is also one of the worst places for Black people to live, with significant gaps in unemployment rates, education, and healthcare. Number 4, Chicago. From the early 1800s, Chicago is known to be one of the most segregated cities in the United States. Over the last century, an array of political and cultural forces have created clear lines of division between racial groups. These demarcations were shaped by racist sentiments toward Black residents and non-whites, and manifested through urban planning, housing policies, discriminatory banking, and other practices, all effectively confining people from different demographic groups to certain parts of the city. Tens of thousands of Black residents are also leaving their traditional South and West Side neighborhoods in recent years, as has been extensively reported, in what some are calling an out-migration or a reverse migration. The city's Black population peaked in the mid-20th century and is now at its lowest level since then, with 787,000 551 black residents as of 2020. Black communities bore the brunt of the closings of 50-plus Chicago public schools that were shuttered during former Mayor Rahm Emanuel's administration. Chicago's suburbs, Indiana, and other Midwestern states are popular destinations for black residents, but most black people are also going back to the South, citing a lack of well-paying jobs and resources, as well as steady gun violence and a rising cost of living as their main reasons for leaving the city. Housing discrimination is still a significant problem in Chicago. A 2017 fair housing study looked into 6 community areas that had the most reported complaints of racial and income discrimination against renters: Jefferson Park, the near North Side, Bridgeport, Hyde Park, Clearing, and Mount Greenwood. 63% of the time, black testers posing as potential renters holding CHA housing choice vouchers experienced some form of discrimination. The highest ratio of discriminatory acts to race-related tests occurred in the near North Side neighborhood, where over half of the tests involved race discrimination, the Chicago Commission on Human Relations and the Chicago Lawyers Committee found. Despite the city's first settler, Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable, being of Haitian descent, Chicago's infamous segregation is still intact, and it joins a list of large cities with similar rates of racial polarization, such as Cleveland, Newark, Philadelphia, and Houston. Through a century of discriminatory strategies from the city and the real estate industry, in addition to antiquated attitudes toward black residents and people of color, Chicago continues to be a city of neighborhoods, highly segregated neighborhoods. Number 5, Harrison, Arkansas. Harrison, Arkansas is among the many small towns that make up the Boone County. Despite the lush nature surrounding the town, it is overshadowed by a darkened cloud. Harrison is not really known for its quaint town square, proximity to Buffalo National Park, or its close-knit community. It is rather known for its racist reputation and unwelcomeness to minorities. Harrison's lack of diversity is deeply rooted in its racist past, which has led to a long-standing reputation that continues to impact the town today. 2 devastating incidents in 1905 and 1909 saw white mobs drive out the town's black population of over 115 people, leaving a lasting scar. The town became known as a sundown town, a term used to describe overwhelmingly white communities that are deemed unsafe for minorities after sunset. This notorious reputation was further solidified when a new and contentious company moved into Harrison, generating widespread media attention. The town's connection to the Ku Klux Klan has also contributed significantly to its racist image. In the late 1980s, the KKK established a presence in Zinc, Arkansas, a small town just 15 miles from Harrison. The organization's leader, Thomas Robb, even claimed that Harrison was the KKK's national headquarters, creating a lasting correlation between the town and the white supremacist Group 1. Today, Harrison's racist past continues to impact the lives of its residents and perpetuate a reputation that many are working to overcome. Numerous media outlets, including international outlets, gained interest, furthering negative press around the so-called Klan town. In 2002, a visiting football team stopped off at a local McDonald's after playing a game at Harrison Junior High. It was Halloween, so the restaurant was running a special: free ice cream cones for people who showed up in costume. A young person came in, draped in a sheet, as a ghost, to collect a free cone. Some visiting athletes of color mistook the costume for a Ku Klux Klan robe, including one young player who was discovered hiding in the corner of the men's room, quaking with fear. A newspaper in Fayetteville published a letter from an adult who traveled with the team about the dangers of visiting Harrison. The local newspaper in Harrison didn't publish it, but citizens knew about and talked about the letter. Most of the reaction in Harrison went like this: why would anyone react like that? What made the black-colored youngsters believe that this was a dangerous place? Harrison's mayor, Bob Reynolds, heard these questions, and he knew they were all genuine, since he understood some of the background of the town's troubled racial history. He knew about the early 20th century violence that drove more than 100 black citizens, leaving only 1 from the town. He knew the outsized media presence of area white supremacist entities, including a family that claimed to be the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan. Leading up to 2020, with the impact of nearly 18 years of the task force, so many anti-racist organizations have been able to take down white supremacist billboards in the town, hold fundraisers for their minority scholarship, host diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative training sessions within the community, and peaceful Black Lives Matter protests. But in July 2020, amid the pandemic and uproar following the murder of George Floyd, Wheeler, a resident and an anti-racist of Harrison, Arkansas, said their hard work felt like it came crashing down when a YouTube video by influencer Rob Bliss reinstated the town's racist reputation. In his video, holding a Black Lives Matter sign in America's most racist town, Bliss stood on the side of the road and outside the Harrison Walmart, innocently advocating for Black Lives Matter. In return, the video showed townspeople in Harrison arguing with him, yelling slurs at him, and threatening him to leave. The video amassed millions of views, currently standing at 12.5 million, and immediately gained worldwide attention, thereby revealing the ongoing racial violence in Harrison. Number 6, Alaska. Wondering if this is true? Yes, it is, but in a different way. Alaska operates on a kind of racism, where they smile in one's face, then screw them over the next second, and act like nothing ever happened. It's quite outrageous when a discrimination case is compromised because of deceitful tactics. Imagine an investigator lying to a company where a black employee works, deliberately sabotaging the case and its government funding. To make matters worse, the police officials went ahead to bribe organizations like the NAACP to silence the black individual and deny them justice. Another disturbing trend is the refusal to prosecute white individuals who commit crimes against black people. This blatant disregard for justice perpetuates the notion that black lives are inferior in Alaska. Such systemic racism undermines trust in law enforcement and the justice system as a whole. For over 150 years, black individuals and families have settled or transited through Alaska. They've patrolled the seas, built roads, served in the military, opened businesses, fought injustice, won political office, created artwork, and forged communities. Historians have often emphasized the stories of Alaska's settler population of mostly white European-descended people who sought to claim and develop indigenous lands. In this regard, blacks in Alaska have occupied a different geopolitical station than they have in other parts of the country, where they have constituted the largest and most visible minority population. Alaskans of African descent are usually not left out. They've been targets of racial discrimination. In recent years, white Alaskans are known to be incredibly racist toward the entire black population, which is a head-scratcher. They complain that the natives get to hunt when they don't. The natives have their own hospitals and all. They also complain about all the things the natives have, and they, being the whites, don't have showcasing the greed they have within them. They want to have it all. They perpetuate stereotypes about natives being more predisposed to crime, alcoholism, and other negative attributes. According to a black anti-racist resident, there was an incident where white high school boys went around shooting homeless native folks in downtown Anchorage with paintball guns. He noted that the native teens at the predominantly white high school were regularly victims of racism and slurs. There are also several reports stating that minorities were definitely treated much differently, from stereotypes to outright hate crimes involving both black people and native Alaskas. In the Anchorage School District of Alaska, black students receive failing grades twice that of white students, while native Alaskans receive failing grades 3 times that of their white counterparts. Number 7, Fresno, California. Cracked roads and blocks of wilted grass and dirt envelop the Edison High School campus in the heart of West Fresno. Police cars, churches, and liquor stores abound, but trees, grocery stores, hospitals, parks, restaurants, and banks remain out of sight. Meanwhile, across highways 180 and 99 heading north toward Bullard Avenue, there is another side of Fresno, where amenities flower and many white residents prosper. The injuries and killings of black men and women at the hands of police officers have constantly flooded the international headlines in recent weeks. While protesters have raised concerns about police brutality locally, residents of Fresno's historically black neighborhoods say other forms of systemic racism have deep generational roots in California's 5th largest city, as they do in many major American cities. Bound roughly by Highway 99 on the east, Marks Avenue on the west, North Avenue on the south, and Highway 180 on the north, West Fresno is home to about 26,500 people. Latinos make up about 2/3 of the area, and Black people about 1/5. According to 2018 data from the U.S. Census Bureau, over half of West Fresno lives below the poverty line, while the rest of Fresno hovers around 27%. West Fresno Black and brown residents earn about half the median salary as the rest of Fresno. Fewer residents graduate high school or own homes, and on average, they live about 20 years less than residents in wealthier parts of the city, according to a 2012 Fresno State study. That's not by accident. Residents told the unrelenting disinvestment, neglect, and a lack of representation have held back generations of Black and brown residents. During her time at Edison Cotton, a former Black resident of Fresno, California, said she endured several instances of blatant racism, including a teacher calling her the N-word multiple times. She fought hard to secure what students in other neighborhoods take for granted, like helmets for her school's football team and restorative justice counselors. But fighting tooth and nail for equal treatment while achieving a 4.9 GPA took its toll. Cotton was diagnosed with acute stress disorder, constantly fought off illness, and ended up in the emergency room several times throughout high school. Cotton is one of the latest in a long string of West Fresno residents who have poured their hearts into securing a better life for the community. While they have made progress, residents feel that without champions on the north side of Shaw Avenue, the divide between the two Fresnos will grow. Number 8, Mississippi. Mississippi has also had previous atrocities in past years. In 1955, Emmett Till, a 14-year-old, was killed and his body thrown in the Tallahatchie River after he allegedly whistled at a white woman. A mob of white men broke into the Pearl County Jail in 1958 and executed Mac Charles Parker, held on charges of raping a white woman. Medgar Evers, too, a civil rights leader, was shot and killed at his doorstep last year. But none of these incidents was tied directly to a massive civil rights effort, and after the Fuhrer died, the state was left more or less to its own affairs. It is feared that the Philadelphia incident may be only a prelude to the struggle ahead. National leaders have called for more civil rights volunteers to supplement the hundreds of students who will conduct schools and voter registration drives among. There will be more federal involvement. These efforts are being met by hostility and suspicion. If the state is not actually being invaded by the enemy, many of its white residents are not to be convinced otherwise. At the same time, the capital city's infrastructure hasn't had any major investment for quite some time, but the recent water issues that happened lately are one of the most humiliating. Jackson is bordered by a 30,000-acre reservoir, ironically named after a white supremacist. Jackson's water crisis is the latest example of the kind of plantation dynamics that still plague Mississippi 150 years after slavery. Racism not only pollutes the water in Mississippi, it pollutes the workplace as well. The dynamics of worker exploitation seen in the state today all have their roots in slavery. White Southern planters, who made their fortunes off the backs of enslaved Africans, had no tolerance for Northerners or abolitionists talking about freedom and equality. During the height of the cotton boom, Mississippi had more millionaires per capita than anywhere else in the country. Planters would rather go to war than even entertain the notion of freeing their slaves and paying a wage like the owners of factories in the North. This is similar to the dynamic way of life in the state today, from how the public money is handed to corporations, or in some cases Brett Favre, instead of being invested into the infrastructure of the people. In the last few decades, major manufacturers like Nissan and Toyota have opened plants in Mississippi because of the billions of dollars the state doles out to these businesses to set up shop here. Mississippi is actually the birthplace of the tax incentive. In 1930, the state used subsidies to lure a company out of Chicago, and since then, tax giveaways like Mississippi's have fueled a manufacturing boom across the South. Workers in these plants are mistreated, overworked, and uninformed about their rights, and employers engage in union-busting tactics to ensure that workers can't organize for better conditions. The minimum wage in such companies is just $7.25, and most times employers that pay such amounts or a little bit higher than that treat workers however they want. Nissan, for example, attracts workers because it pays $15 per hour. A particular witness of this is a black individual who was sent on a workers' rights panel with other Mississippi organizers and U.S. She wrote that the Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh, and one other Nissan worker talked about the plantation culture at the plant and how workers there feel like property. She emphasized that when tax dollars are funneled to companies that perpetuate plantation-like dynamics, it's tantamount to funding the black race's own exploitation. That is, the whites are essentially using their own resources against them. Mississippi's anti-union environment is another way racism pollutes the workplace. Mississippi is an at-will or right-to-work state, a major selling point for big corporations. Only 5% of Mississippi's workers are union members, and the workers that are in unions are mostly white males. That means 95% of workers who have no representation are subjected to low pay, unsafe working conditions, and humiliation in exchange for a paycheck. 18.7% of residents live at or below the national poverty level, and 91% of those poor are people of color. Since unions have been proven to close wealth gaps for black workers, allowing workers to organize has the potential to address these long-standing inequities. Unfortunately, politicians from southern states have been able to successfully convince voters that unions will stifle the businesses that are moving to the state. This also has its roots in slavery. The powers that have been in the South are those that are desperate to maintain access to cheap labor. When federal troops pulled out of the South after the Civil War, they left black people in a dangerous position. With no protection from Union soldiers, whites in the South, still seething with anger over the loss of the war, were able to easily take back every gain made. This is the system that created Jim Crow, segregation, disenfranchisement, lynchings, and the resurgence of the KKK. Rich whites were able to essentially get their free workforce back by passing racist vagrancy laws. This unjustly put African Americans back on plantations by using convict leasing programs, which started America's current prison industrial complex. The South is without a doubt the most anti-union, anti-worker region in the U.S., and the poverty rate in it makes all modes of worker abuse possible. Alternatively, this moment can be viewed as a groundbreaking opportunity to establish new labor rights, marking a significant turning point after 150 years of exploitation. If achieved, this could ultimately pave the way for true freedom and empowerment for black workers. Number 9, Honolulu. Honolulu, the capital city of Hawaii, is often perceived as a paradise with a unique cultural blend. However, beneath its idyllic surface, the city struggles with issues of racism and discrimination, including anti-black racism. Despite being a minority, black people in Honolulu face distinct challenges that are often overlooked. Research has shown that black residents and visitors in Honolulu experience microaggressions, subtle expressions of racism that can be damaging and perpetuate feelings of exclusion and otherness. For instance, a black person might be asked, "Where are you really from?" implying that they are not from Hawaii or the United States. Such questions, although often unintentional, can be hurtful and reinforce stereotypes. Discrimination in housing and employment is another significant issue affecting black people in Honolulu. Studies have found that black applicants face discrimination in the rental market, with some landlords refusing to rent to them. Similarly, black individuals also encounter barriers in the job market, limiting their access to opportunities and resources. The lack of representation is also a concern for black people in Honolulu. With a relatively small population, black people often find themselves underrepresented in government, education, and other areas. This leading to a lack of voice and visibility, making it challenging for their concerns to be addressed. Instances of police brutality and racial profiling against black people in Honolulu are not left out, and these have raised concerns about systemic racism and bias within the criminal justice system. Varieties of incidents have sparked protests and calls for reform, highlighting the need for greater accountability and transparency. In Honolulu, the spirit of aloha is deeply ingrained in the local culture. However, for black people, this spirit is not always extended to them. The aloha is a principle that emphasizes compassion, kindness, and inclusivity, but in practice, it often seems reserved for those who fit into the traditional Hawaiian mold. While white visitors and residents often have the privilege of experiencing the aloha spirit without hesitation, black people are frequently subjected to skepticism, exclusion, and racism. This disparity highlights the need for a more nuanced understanding of aloha and its application in contemporary Hawaiian society. According to the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission's 2019 annual report, discrimination remains a significant issue in Hawaii, with Black individuals facing unique challenges. The U.S. Census Bureau's Quick Facts also highlights the underrepresentation of Black people in Honolulu County. Furthermore, local news outlets, such as the Honolulu Star-Advertiser, have reported on instances of police brutality and racial profiling, sparking calls for reform. Number 10. Leith, North Dakota. Leith, North Dakota, a very small town located in the southwestern corner of Grant County, is known to have experienced racism and white supremacist activities in the past. In 2011, a white supremacist named Craig Cobb began buying land in Leith, a small town in Grant County, North Dakota. His vision was to create a neo-Nazi stronghold, which he called Cobbsville. Cobb's dream was to build a community where white supremacists could live, gather, and promote their hate-filled ideology without fear of persecution. To bring his twisted vision to life, Cobb started recruiting other white supremacists to join him in Leith. He even invited Tom Metzger, a former Ku Klux Klan leader, to visit the town and potentially relocate. Metzger, notorious for promoting violent racism, was a key figure in the white supremacist movement. Cobb's actions sent shockwaves through the small town, leaving residents on edge. The people of Leith were deeply concerned about Cobb's plans and the potential for violence and hate crimes. With a population of only about 20 residents at the time, they felt vulnerable to Cobb's extremist ideology. In response, the community came together to oppose Cobb's plans and promote a message of inclusivity and tolerance. Tensions escalated in August 2013, when a confrontation between Cobb and the town's residents led to his arrest. He was charged with menacing and terrorizing, and was later sentenced to 4 years of supervised probation. The incident drew national attention, highlighting the ongoing struggle against white supremacy and hate groups in the United States. The events in Leith, North Dakota, serve as a stark reminder of the persistent threat of white supremacy and hate groups in America. The community's bravery in standing up against Cobb's hate-filled plans demonstrates the importance of promoting inclusivity, tolerance, and equality. Today, Leith remains a small but resilient community, committed to upholding these values and ensuring that hate has no home in their town. Number 11. Pulaski, Tennessee. Pulaski, a town with a racial makeup of 69.11% whites, 19.12% blacks, and 11.22% of other races. Pulaski, Tennessee is known as the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan, popularly abbreviated as KKK, or the Klan was founded on December 24, 1865, by 6 ex-Confederate soldiers for the purpose of terrorizing, killing, and burning the already freed blacks, abolitionists, and white sympathizers. The group, which started up as a small racist club, has now grown into a large troop with so many members worldwide. Today, many Pulaski white residents support the plaque as it represents rivalry in the face of the Union and not a representation of racism, and this is a sentiment that does not agree with many Black Americans who reside in the town, so they are still standing up to fight for their rights. At the same time, other locals are doing their best to fight the reputation through social actions, arts, and so on. An instance of this is the Unsung Heroes Project, the Painting for the Trail of Tears Museum, which teaches about the Indian Act Removal Act, which forced Native Black Americans off their lands. Number 12. Rochester, New York. In a recent survey, 21% of respondents from Rochester, New York, stated that racial or ethnic discrimination in the city is a significant problem in the region. The survey, organized by the Levine Center to End Hate and the Jewish Federation of Greater Rochester, analyzes local attitudes toward discrimination. The Jewish Federation of Greater Rochester said the survey showed that Rochester is one of the overall welcoming places in the U.S., according to 81% of respondents. But unfortunately, the region still has challenges with discrimination based on race, sexual orientation, religion, and gender. A staggering 83% of residents acknowledge that racial problems persist for people of color in their community. While many white residents recognize discrimination as an issue, it remained a theoretical concern for them. In stark contrast, the majority of African Americans reported experiencing racial discrimination firsthand, making it an inescapable part of their daily lives. From the compilation of the entire research, it is obvious that racial division exists in perceptions of discrimination, with a substantial majority of Black individuals of about 69%, identifying race-based discrimination as a major issue, in stark contrast to the 18% of white individuals who share this concern. Those who reported experiencing racial discrimination firsthand revealed that these incidents often occurred in everyday settings. More than half, 51%, encountered discrimination while engaging in routine activities such as shopping or dining at restaurants. The workplace emerged as another hotspot for racial discrimination, with 45% of those who experienced discrimination reporting that it happened on the job. These findings underscore the pervasive nature of racial discrimination, which permeates various aspects of life in Rochester, from public spaces to professional environments. Number 13, Trenton, New Jersey. The city of Trenton showed on an unflattering national list of a 2023 report that identified the most racist U.S. cities. The report identified Black Americans as one of the most discriminated against races in the United States. That should serve as no real revelation for anyone living in Trenton or elsewhere. WPR used 5-year estimate data from the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey from 2016 to collect data about median household income, unemployment rates, home ownership, poverty rate, and adult high school and bachelor's degree attainment. A notable example of this incident occurred on October 22, 2018, aboard a Flixbus coach traveling from Trenton to Rome, which departed at 10 p.m. In a Facebook account of the episode by a student from Ferrara, an Italian lady around 40 years of age demanded that a 25-year-old man from Senegal named Mamadou leave his seat next to her and move to the back of the bus, reportedly adding, "You're colored, you're of another religion." The woman's persistence escalated the situation, causing the young man, who had been seated where the driver instructed, to become emotional and tearful. He urged her to call the police, hoping they would verify his right to travel on the bus and occupy the seat. The woman complied, and the police arrived promptly. However, instead of resolving the issue in his favor, the young man was asked to relocate, highlighting the racism he faced, even from the authorities he had trusted to uphold his rights. Number 14, Naperville, Illinois. Naperville is a city in DuPage and Will counties in the U.S. state of Illinois. It is a southwestern suburb of Chicago, located 28 miles west of the city on the DuPage River. As of the 2020 census, its population was 149,540, making it the state's fourth most populous city, with a racial makeup of 63.6% whites, 21% Asian, 4.56% Black Americans, 3.43% 2+ non-Hispanics, 3.24% white Hispanics. The city, being a suburb of Chicago, has long been regarded as a diverse and inclusive community, where residents from various backgrounds come together to create a vibrant and welcoming city. However, beneath its idyllic surface, Naperville is not immune to the complexities of racism and discrimination that plague many cities and towns. Racial disparities in education and economic opportunities still persist in today's world in the city, thereby limiting access to resources and opportunities for certain groups. Hate speech and bias-motivated crimes have also been reported from various angles of the city. On February 23rd, Gregory McMichael, Travis McMichael, and William Bryan hunted and lynched Ahmaud Arbery. On March 15th, the police shot and killed Breonna Taylor while acting on an illegal no-knock warrant. Throughout the rest of March and April 2019, reports of COVID-19's disproportionate impact on Black communities poured into homes and phones across the globe. So did reports about how structural racism intensified COVID-19's impact on indigenous communities and Latino communities, and reports about the rise of anti-Asian racism. Several reports about the rise of anti-Asian racism emerged from Naperville. The town's city council passed a resolution denouncing all acts of racism, intolerance, and unlawful discrimination, and will not tolerate them of any kind, in response to a woman calling Asian residents that supported a ban on selling recreational marijuana in Naperville roving carpetbaggers. The woman made the racist remark while reading from a prepared statement at a council meeting. This background information frames what happened in Naperville over Memorial Day weekend, for less than 24 hours before police officers murdered George Floyd, keeping his corpse pinned to Minneapolis asphalt for 2 minutes after forcing the life from his body, his beautiful and wonderfully made body. A black structure in the middle of Naperville's Cantori Park read, "White Pride." It's no big surprise, as Naperville was among the sundown towns in the U.S. that removed some of its overtly racist policies because of an interest convergence, white economic aspirations, which required cheap non-white labor. Those in civic power in Naperville were not taking proactive steps to foster an equitable and inclusive community, where diversity is valued and all individuals have equal opportunities. This lack of effort has hindered the city's progress towards becoming a truly multi-racialized community. They labored to forge a modern-day plantation on which middle and upper-class whites reside in a metaphorical big house. Of course, their actual houses are also enormous, and poor whites and racialized minorities are the needed labor force living in lesser conditions on site to make the plantation run. A cursory drive through Naperville reveals as much. And the last on the list, number 15, Milwaukee. As the Democratic National Convention shines a national spotlight on Milwaukee, the city's profound racial inequality and oppression have come under intense scrutiny. This timely attention coincides with America's ongoing reckoning with police violence and racial injustice, forcing a confrontation with the enduring legacy of white supremacy. Milwaukee serves as a poignant case study, illustrating the devastating impact of systemic racism on contemporary American life. The city's entrenched racial disparities, born from centuries of discriminatory policies and practices, have created a stark contrast between the experiences of white and black residents. From education and employment to housing and healthcare, Milwaukee's racial divide is evident in nearly every aspect of life. The African American community in Milwaukee faces significant barriers to economic mobility, perpetuating cycles of poverty and disadvantage. These obstacles include intense segregation in housing and education, as well as a criminal justice system that disproportionately affects communities of color. Furthermore, a myriad of other hardships rooted in the city's history of racism exacerbate these challenges. A recent report authored by University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee professor Mark Levine brings the city's rigid racial divisions into sharp focus, illuminating just how pronounced Milwaukee's disparities are, even when compared with other major cities experiencing similar issues. Levine's investigation reveals that Milwaukee's staggering 33.4% black poverty rate is nearly 5 times higher than that of whites in the city, while the median household income for African Americans, a figure 42% lower than it is for white residents, ranks as the lowest among America's 50 largest metropolitan areas. Milwaukee has long held the disgraceful distinction as the most segregated city in the country. It has an unconscionably high infant mortality rates for black babies, and it also incarcerates its African American citizens at a rate 10 times higher than white people. This rampant racial inequality has become part and parcel to daily life in the city of Milwaukee, an epidemic perpetuated by a collective unwillingness to seriously address it. In closing, to eradicate systemic racism in the city and across the U.S., it's essential to have absolute clarity about its origins. While many deny the existence of structural racism, blaming people of color for social ills through racial stereotypes, the injustices endured by black individuals today are, in fact, still a direct result of the institution of white supremacy that has been ingrained in the United States since its inception. That brings us to the end of yet another video segment, and if you found this quite engaging and informative, kindly click on the thumb up button in front of you, share video with friends and families, and consider subscribing to our channel if you are yet to. We are delighted to have you with us on this journey, and your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching, and see you in our next video.